BYU Law School presents The Future of Antitrust. Competing in the New Global Economy was a webinar held on November 17, 2025. In this webinar, we will hear how farmers and small businesses in the United States are navigating the current landscape as they strive to remain competitive in the new global economy.
Hello and welcome to a BYU Law Future of Antitrust webinar event. Today we're going to be discussing a topic titled Competing in the New Global Economy. We're very excited to have with us today three panelists that over the course of almost the last 11 months have been navigating upheaval in U.S. trade policy. And we're going to have the opportunity to discuss with them how they've been attempting to navigate these changes as they have strived to remain competitive in this new global order. So just as a bit of context for all of those that are joining to watch this webinar, this is a follow-on event. So a few months ago, back in August, we organized a conference in Washington, D.C., and this the three panelists that we have with us today participated in one of the panels at that conference. And we thought that this would be a great topic to open up to a broader audience here on the internet. So we're very grateful to Sue-Ann, Jenna, and Aaron for agreeing to come back and continue this conversation. We're going to be revisiting some of the topics that we discussed at that DC conference, but there's also been developments as recently as a few weeks ago that are still impacting their businesses and how they're trying to navigate these changes. So we'll also be talking about those recent developments. So to start, I wanted to ask each of our panelists to please introduce themselves. So if you want to tell us your name and your business, and then once we've done the introductions, I'll jump in here to our first question. So just so we've got an order, how about Sue-Ann? Do you want to introduce yourself first, followed by Jenna, and then by Aaron?
Sure, thanks, Cree. I'm Sue-Ann Song. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Appointed. I started the company 10 years ago, and we manufacture in the U.S. Paper goods, notebooks, planners, any paper products that you use in your everyday work. We're considered a leader in our niche, and a lot of folks don't think that we're necessarily impacted by tariffs because we're primarily American made. It's definitely had an impact on our day-to-day, everything from a little bit less reciprocal tariffs. We have about 800 retailers in the U.S., or 800 retailers worldwide. About 15% of those are Canadian. And so we're navigating that. Importing of raw goods has been difficult for us. And then just everyday sort of hiccups just while trying to run the business. But yeah, so I'm happy to be here and sort of share our insight of the impact on an American-made consumer brand.
Thanks, Sue-Ann.
Thanks so much for having us here today, Cree, and to BYU Law for hosting this panel. My name is Jenna Wilson. I'm the co-founder and co-owner of a small business called Ace and Jig. We are an apparel and textile company. We're in our 17th year of operation, and we custom design all of our own yarn dye woven textiles, and we make them into clothing and home goods, and it's 100% made in India with one family-owned operation there that we got fair trade certified. It's all organic, it's fair trade. We try to do things as ethically and sustainably as we can. So as you can imagine, we are very impacted by the tariff developments because everything we do is made and created in India. So we are currently paying our typical tariffs, which have always been there. Since we went into business anyway, have always been fluctuated a little bit, but they've been sitting around 16% on average. And right now we are paying 66% on average for everything we bring in. So it's been a dramatic, something that has been a big thing for us to really deal with. So I'm happy to be here today and talk about it.
All right. Thank you, Jenna. Aaron?
Well, thank you for inviting us here, and thank you to BYU for addressing this really important topic. My name is Aaron Lehman. I'm a fifth-generation farmer from central Iowa. I grow corn, soybeans, oats, and hay. And I also serve as president of the Iowa Farmers Union, which is made up of family farmers and rural residents throughout the state of Iowa. And we have a number of commodity growers who are deeply impacted by trade policy. So it's good to be here and to learn and to share.
Okay, thank you all. So I'd like to open the webinar by first asking each of you to discuss how you and others that you know in your respective industries have been navigating trade developments in the last 11 months, and which developments specifically have had the biggest impact on your respective businesses. And how about we go in reverse order this time? So we'll start with Aaron, then to Jenna, and then to Sue Ann.
This is that's an excellent question, Creve. This has really been top of mind for so many of our farmers in Iowa. We export a large portion of our soybeans and our other commodities as well. And as such, we are going through a real roller coaster in the trade arena. When our country places tariffs on other countries, one of the first products they retaliate against with a retaliatory tariff are ag products. And so farmers have been facing a lot of retaliatory tariffs, which and the impact means is that we are the price that we receive for our soybeans has been going down. So farmers are on an economic downturn because of retaliatory tariffs. In addition to that, a lot of the things farmers purchase, whether it be fertilizer, machinery parts, those things are when a tariff is placed on them, the cost to our farmers has been going up for those products as well. So we've been impacted on both the income, on the income we receive, and the cost of the inputs we purchase has been going up as well.
Aaron, can I just ask a follow-up question? Are there particular tariffs on particular countries that have had an outsized effect for your industry? I know that you mentioned soybeans, and I know that China, for example, is a big consumer of U.S. soybeans in a typical year. Are there other countries in addition to China that have been having an impact for farmers
for sure.
in Iowa?
Yeah, and I think China probably has the most prominent role, both for in our state for soybeans and for pork. But the tariffs have impacted our sales to all of our major other customers as well, Canada and Mexico in particular. We've been on a real roller coaster with those big three, but other countries as well. But those three in particular on our largest commodities that we grow here in Iowa.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Jenna?
Yeah, so I think that the tariff developments have been enormously impactful and difficult for our business. As I mentioned, we work exclusively with a family-run business in India. We have a very thoughtful and long-standing relationship with them. And like Aaron, I think you mentioned a while ago that your farmers plant once a year. There's a life cycle to what we do too, which is very long. And so we're from concept to creation about a year in the process because we make our own fabric. So we obtain yarns. There's this whole process of, preparing the yarns, the weaving of the yarns, creating the fabrics, and then cutting and sewing the garments. So one of the most difficult things for us to deal with has been the fact that this has been a very sudden and radical change right in the middle of a process where we planned carefully and conservatively to have the right amount of budget and money and resources to make this product as we've been doing for 17 years successfully. And then in the middle, the game just changes so radically. So it's been really difficult. I will also say for my colleagues who are in the apparel industry, fashion industry, also American businesses, many of them have been around 10 to 20 years, just like us. They're struggling too, whether they manufacture in the US, whether they manufacture in China, whether they manufacture in India, wherever they manufacture, there's been so much upheaval, not just the tariff application. So I know when China suddenly had 100% plus tariffs, I knew people who moved their operation. Okay, now we'll make it in India, then they're moved back to China. We don't have the kind of brand where we would or could do that. Our product is so specific and long process, thoughtfully made in a specific way. but that there's been this enormous kind of game of like chess. And then on top of that, for people making in USA, there's a lot of things that, just like Suan's talking, we'll talk more about. There are inputs that you get your silk from China, or you get different materials, different things, or come from different parts of the world. So it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenna. Suan?
So for us, it's like Jenna was just saying, it's the inputs, it's the raw materials. The from everything from increased costs to lead times have stretched significantly. To we've seen some small businesses or wire manufacturers. We use a lot of metal wire on most of our products. Have gone out of business, and so we're just constantly pivoting. We with the tariffs in China, where a lot of our raw materials and inputs were coming from, we quickly pivoted to see where we could diversify that material. So a good amount is made in Germany, so we diversified there. Some is made in South Korea, and so we were just quickly buying where we could, where and sort of reacting on what tariffs were in place. But I was mentioning in our prep call earlier, we pivoted and purchased quite a bit of raw material from South Korea because the tariffs were significantly less. But those are waiting in Memphis, Tennessee, because FedEx is so inundated with tariff processing or processing of their customs that we were supposed to get that sometime in October. We had put in the order in August, and there's just no answer. So it's just like this constant delay and uncertainty, and it's just chaotic for us, even as an American manufacturer. So it's just sort of like the daily trying to figure that out. And it's on top of the challenge of just making sure that we have plenty of inventory for Q4 and holiday. We do 35% of our annual revenue in 6 weeks from November to December. And I'm just making sure that we have inventory. And so some products that we would normally have, we're just not going to have because we couldn't get certain wire in place, which is crazy, but it's just like the constant, or it's our reality now.
Yeah. Thank you, Suan.
Yeah.
So thanks for that overview of how your businesses and others in your industry have been impacted. I wanted to next ask, so one of the stated objectives of the recent changes in the last 11 months to U.S. trade policy has been to increase the amount of manufacturing that happens in the United States. Suan, you've already mentioned that how even as a business that is already doing your production in the United States, the tariffs have been really disruptive and made production in the United States more challenging. I was curious to know how much of your products are produced in the United States, and to the extent the production is done overseas, what would it take to make economic sense to move that production to the United States? So I know, Aaron, that all of your production happens in the United States, so maybe you can sit out this question because it's already happening here. Suan, what's your sense of how hard it would be for the inputs that you're sourcing from overseas? How hard would it be to source them here? What sort of infrastructure would we need to have here in the United States to do that? And then for Jenna, I know that you have a very unique and thoughtful process of production. If you want to talk a little bit more about what that process entails and how challenging it would be to replicate that process here in the United States.
Sure. So our product being yarn dye woven textiles that we design from scratch, and we start with the fibers and make them this long kind of beautiful process. The fabrics we make are incredibly special. That's really, and there's a lot of people in the fashion sphere and in the apparel sphere. So how we've succeeded is by having a niche that's very specific and specialized that we really care about and we're passionate about. And so it's not the kind of product where we could just, that the product, the story and the brand is 100% based around these textiles. So the textiles, we found our manufacturer and our weavers because they speak that language, and that's a generational skill and love and passion for them too. And they have the equipment and the know-how and the desire and excitement to make this myriad of textiles that we design with us. And they're textiles that are there's a lot of really great textile stuff going on in the US, but a lot of the weaves and weights and textures and kind of intricacies of what we make aren't being made here. And it would be very hard to make here. I think that the infrastructure would have to be created and it would be very, very expensive. We don't have, as a small business, that kind of access to capital. In fact, if we have access to capital right now, we're spending it on tariffs. So it's just absolutely out of the question to then think of then now I need more capital to try to build a weaving facility. Um, so on top of just not having maybe the expertise to run those looms, for example. So it's just an industry that we do it very differently than what's being done here in this country. So that would the lift there, not only with money and training and time, it's just too big of a hurdle for our business. We also have really we believe in the way that we're making things. We've invested greatly in our team that we work with in India. And we're their sole sponsor that we got them fair trade certified. Again, we work very ethically and sustainably, organic yarns, and we believe in our process there as well. So, and we're very invested, and it's a very long process. So it would be there's really the idea of picking it up and moving it here is very very challenging and lofty idea for our business.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Jenna? So I think one thing is the equipment. Say there was a facility that had the right equipment there. How hard is it to learn for to train a U.S. workforce to actually do the production that's currently happening in India? And how hard would it be to then train that workforce? And just thinking the trade-off between like paying the U.S. salaries versus what you're paying for production in India.
Yeah.
Even if you could train the workforce, given what you would have to pay that workforce to do, would it, if all of the inputs were here, would it make economic sense to try to pull that off here in the United States?
Right. That's a good question. I think it depends. Like if the infrastructure magically appeared and the training was, magically done, I think it depends on what it is. One example where it really wouldn't make sense is that we do some hand weaves, where we're using an indigenous yarn called calico from native to India, that is spun and hand woven on these ancient looms. Like that's something where it would absolutely not make sense to do it here. With again the labor hours and things are pretty intensive. So I think it depends on the product and how it's being woven in terms of that. Because we do everything, it's all fair trade certified, etc. It's not an inexpensive process to do anywhere on earth, I will say. So that's a good question though.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. Suanna, what about for the inputs that you're sourcing from overseas? What sort of infrastructure would we need here in order for you to be able to source them here in the United States?
I mean, it 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they used to be manufactured in the US and then they got moved over because it's cheaper, obviously, to manufacture overseas. It's possible to bring the manufacturing of those inputs back to the US. I think it's like a layered solution from investing in domestic manufacturing, giving incentives or tax credits for or relief on tariffs, or at least like a credit, or exempting on raw materials. I think it's and then also like incentivizing labor, because that's probably the most expensive piece instead of the actual raw goods. I think it's possible. And, when I talk to a lot of our manufacturers and partners, they would like for the manufacturing to be in the US. It's just not the infrastructure and the support is just not there. It's just very, very expensive, but I wouldn't say hopeful, but I think it's possible. And I'm fearful things like paper mills, it will soon go by the wayside and be moved overseas, but we'll sort of see once we get past this. this sort of chaotic phase of the tariffs.
Can you say a little bit more about the paper mill? So right now, are you able to source paper from the United States?
All of our paper is sourced in the U.S. There are probably now four major paper mills that are still based in the US, but more and more companies are importing that material or the actual finished paper products from overseas. That gets expensive because paper in itself can be pretty heavy. But there is gradually talk of some of these paper mills are saying it's very, very hard to stay in business in the US. And so that's sort of an underlying fear I have. I think it's maybe not for a while or for the long term. But yeah, that would for sure change our business significantly if that's our main material. But thankfully for now, it seems like it's at a steady place where manufacturing is still staying in the US.
Okay, thank you. So a follow-up to the prior question, if you were to move parts of your production to the United States, what else would need to happen for your business to remain competitive and profitable? So when you mentioned, I think maybe Suan will let you field this question because I think Jen has essentially said it would be impossible for you to move production to the United States. Can you say a little bit more about tax breaks or incentives, things that would help facilitate a transition to U.S. production in this space? And maybe I'm going to build on your prior answer. To the extent that you think paper production in the United States is somewhat stable at this point, do you think the tariffs have helped stabilize paper production in the United States? Do you think there's been an increase in demand for U.S. paper because people that were sourcing paper from outside the United States maybe are switching to U.S. paper?
That's possible. I don't know enough about paper manufacturing in the U.S. or sort of what the landscape of that is financially. I think it's possible. I think speaking to my own business, we've had, most brands in our category are importing their products. That's not, I don't have any judgment for or against that. It's just their business model. And I know, most of my peers, founders of different paper companies and stationery brands, where we share a lot of information, meaning like what are we seeing, what are our customers seeing, or what. And so I think one of the things is, especially for holiday, a lot of our peers or competitors they have a delay in their finished products being imported. And so for us, we're seeing an increase on our B2B sales. Not hugely, but because we're able to turn around our products and we have certain inventory in stock. And some companies or some of our B2B brand or customers and clients want to purchase American made. So there's definitely, we have a leg up there and we're trying to maximize that. But what was the first part of your question, Cree?
So what are some additional infrastructure things that could happen in terms of what else could the government be doing besides just raising tariffs to better incentivize and support manufacturing of the inputs specifically that you need here in the United States?
Well, I think just generally American manufacturing. I mean, we manufacture our products. So we're 94% of our product is made in the US. The inputs, the raw goods only make up a small percentage of our product. If there's tax incentives, if we're credited for manufacturing our product in the US, I think for sure that would certainly help. I don't think that's the solution. I think incentivizing and providing capital and support. We just moved. We had a 10,000 square foot warehouse in Washington, D.C. That's where I founded the company 10 years ago. And we were manufacturing and finishing all of our products in DC. It was just so expensive for us to do that we moved all of our manufacturing to upstate New York. But even access to capital, whether it's SBA grants or loans to help support our manufacturing would be hugely helpful to a company of my size. And I think, I see sort of the roundabout solution that the tariffs are providing, but it doesn't provide tangible everyday support for a company like me and companies that may be in my position that might be able to manufacture in the US. But for a small business of mine, access to capital and supporting the infrastructure would be, to me, that would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, thank you. We're gonna be talking about this a bit more later on our webinar, but to the extent also that tariffs are introduced quickly and go away quickly, it also maybe is less effective than something that's a reliable tax credit or access to capital that would be more predictable for people that are trying to plan out their business. All right, so there have been two very recent developments that are relevant to our discussion. The first is the pausing of U.S. heightened tariffs on goods imported from China on November 4th. So this was just 12 days ago, following trade discussions between the United States and China in late October. So, Aaron, I was curious to ask you, has there been any movement that you have been able to see on U.S. agricultural exports to China since this announcement?
Well, there have been. We have to remember where we've been, though, but to kind of put that in context, our largest buyer of soybeans didn't buy a single soybean from us for months since the end of May. So month after month after month in a very normally busy buying season, none of our soybeans went to our biggest customer. That was China. They went to other countries, largely South American countries, to buy soybeans that they needed. So when the announcement was made, a lot of the buying had already been completed. So the agreement put some targets in place. We have seen some purchases begin. We're happy for that because we were at zero, but we're not on track to meet those goals yet. Initially we thought, well, there's going to be a flush of buying right at the signing of the agreement. Well, in truth, what happened is that so many soybeans were already purchased from farmers in other countries already. Some of the bins were already full in China, so the need wasn't as backed up as might have been expected. So we did see a market response. We're grateful for that, but it's still very much below the cost of production, to what it costs us to grow soybeans. So we got a long ways to go to recover from the losses that we've seen so far this year.
And can you just give us some idea of soybean sales at this same time last year as a percentage of where you're at this year? What percentage of sales have you done this year relative to a typical year?
Yeah, so in the large picture, right, from our largest customer, we're well below 25% of what we were a year ago. Anecdotally from the farm, we're seeing a lot of farmers who would normally be selling soybeans that they've just harvested. They'd be filling their cash needs by selling some immediate soybeans. A lot of farmers are holding, right? They're waiting because price is still below the cost of production. We've got a long ways to go to recover. So a lot of farmers are holding, waiting, hoping for more market opportunity to come. In some places, some farmers have been selling to their normal grain terminal, their local grain terminal, for decades. And some of those local grain terminals said, sorry, we take our soybeans that we get from you and we put them on a train and then they get on a boat. They're not moving. So we're not even taking them. So for a number of farmers, they're not even moving their product to their normal place. They're going to have to put them on a truck to go hundreds of miles in the opposite direction to find a market. And that's depressing the entire marketplace. So that's the context we're in. We're glad that we're not at ground zero, right? But it's a little too tough to tell about the promise of gains from these trade deals. So we're looking for what might be happening next.
So just so I can kind of restate to see if I'm internalizing what you said correctly, when the United States and China kind of paused their reciprocal tariffs, you did see an uptake in sales, but those sales happened at a price point that was below the sales that did happen are happening at a price point that's below cost of production.
Yeah.
And that even if you have some farmers in Iowa that would like to sell soybeans, that there's not even a way for them to sell those soybeans because that product isn't moving, and so they're just needing. Some are waiting for prices to go up, but even those that would like to sell, there's not enough demand to even move some of that
Yeah,
product.
not enough incentive to sell yet. They'll find a market. They'll just have to go farther away. It'll find a different place. The price point will go down. So those soybeans won't rot forever. They'll be put to good use. But this at a price point that is below the cost of production for farmers.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Sue-Ann, I was going to ask you next. So how, if at all, does this announcement of the pausing on the reciprocal tariffs between China and the United States, how does that affect your business strategy when thinking about where to source inputs for the products you're producing in the United States?
Yeah, so when that was announced earlier this month, we put in a sizable purchase order for raw goods coming out of China, though that takes anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks. So we're just hoping nothing changes because the tariffs get applied once they come, arrive to the U.S. So that was sort of our immediate reaction to that. Either way, long term, we'll be diversifying supply chain. We can't. I mean, for almost the 10 years that I've had the business, it was majority raw material. The raw materials were coming out of China, some Europe. During COVID, we diversified during COVID to Europe, which is a lot more expensive. But overall, we're diversifying supply chain. I think I mentioned we were getting some inputs from South Korea that are stuck in customs right now. But I think the short or the long term, regardless of what happens with the Supreme Court, we will need to diversify. It's just a matter of, are we doing it reactive, a little bit chaotic, and just trying to be cost efficient as possible, versus long term, we know if we can diversify supply chain and be smart about it and implement it as a part of the overall business plan to bring down our cost of goods, that's obviously the ideal. It's just sort of like, is it reactive or is this like building with confidence and planning for growth? We're hoping it's the latter, but it's hard to tell right now. And it's just like day to day, similar to, I'm sure Jenna knows, like I just want to get through holiday without and hope for like our normal sales. And it's just like I can barely focus on that because I'm just making sure that we have that our partners have all the raw goods that they need to make our product.
Yeah, thank you, Sue-Ann.
Mm-hmm.
So the second recent development, so the first was the pause in reciprocal tariffs between the United States and China. The second recent development is the oral arguments that were heard by the United States Supreme Court on November 5th, challenging the president's ability to impose tariffs under the International Economic Emergencies Power Act, otherwise known as IEEPA. Although there's no ruling yet, the court's questioning seems to suggest it has reservations about the constitutionality of these tariffs implemented by the president. And so my question is if these tariffs are ruled to violate the IEEPA statute or the U.S. Constitution, which would effectively nullify the tariffs the U.S. has imposed on many countries, including some of the tariffs on China and the tariffs that have been imposed on India, how would that ruling either affect your short and long-term decision-making for your business? So we'll first consider if the court strikes down the IEEPA tariffs, how that would affect your business in the short and long term. And then a follow-up question just to signal for our panelists. I'll then ask if they end up upholding those tariffs, does that change your short or long-term strategy? Answer. So Jenna, we'll go ahead and start with you. And then we'll go to Aaron and then to Sue-Ann.
Yeah, so we've been watching that case really closely, and I think we were feeling, cautiously, mildly encouraged by the what we were hearing, even from some of the conservative justices expressing some skepticism around the IEEPA use for the tariffs. I think as a business, we would be very happy to see a ruling that said that that was not an appropriate use of the IEEPA and that the tariffs needed to be more conventionally applied. Tariff changes and trade changes needed to be more conventionally applied and not as in a way that seems so sudden and dramatic. I think it's a huge, as you mentioned, Sue-Ann, just trying to do mid-range to long-range planning right now since the tariffs have been enacted has been almost impossible for our business. We've just been in crisis mode, trying to react. We had, I think it was a 26% tariff brought in April, then there was a 10%, then it went to 25%, then on August 27th, a 50%. And that's on top of our typical 16. That's not part of it. It's on top of that. So it's been just a complete and utter roller coaster ride. That's put us into a very reactive space. We're focused right now. One of the things we're really focused on is having tons and tons of pop-up, sudden in-person events to try to sell off the inventory we have in the USA. It's just a massive amount of orchestration to try to change the way you're doing things midstream. So we would love to see something happen that would provide a measure of more stability. We understand that tariffs are part of international law and relations and trade, but the very dramatic and sudden enactment of them and then repeal and then enactment has been very, very hard and if not impossible to do business with. So we would really welcome seeing that change. I know there's a lot of skepticism then in that, oh, well, what will come next? But for us, just getting that ruling would be a win.
Thank you, Jenna. Aaron, what about for you and other farmers in Iowa?
Yeah, certainly we think that it's appropriate for there to be more authority placed with our elected leaders in Congress dealing with tariffs, and a ruling in the against the tariffs would be a step in the right direction to rebalancing the playing field when it comes to who has the authority on tariffs. Our farmers have been very leery of so much authority resting with one individual, with any administration, because that administration might be subject to all sorts of political pressures, and that may not reflect the broader sense of the country and of farmers. So it would be a movement in the right direction for our folks, and our farmers are paying attention to it, and it's not just our farmers. It's the farmers' input suppliers. It's our lenders who are trying to make sense of what's happening with the farmer economics. Right now, this is the time of year where farmers are trying to line up financing to put a crop in the ground next year. So the entire rural community is trying to see what is the playing field. Is there an appropriate balance? Certainly an appropriate use of a tariff is needed sometimes. We need a tool to provide some sort of mechanism to provide some real fairness for farmers on the ground, workers on the ground. So an appropriate use of tariff is certainly going to work for farmers. Having the proper rules in place, that's really what we're looking for out of this rule.
Can I ask a follow-up for you, Aaron?
Sure.
Let's say that the Supreme Court rules against the IEEPA as a mechanism to implement tariffs. Does that change what you anticipate other farmers in Iowa will be planting in the upcoming season? And in terms of like day to day, does it change actually the crop that you're putting in the ground and where you're going to be trying to sell that crop, next fall?
In some cases, it might. Right, there are some crops that will be less subject to a chaotic trade policy, so that might impact what planting. But there aren't that too many decisions. It's very difficult to make decisions for a farmer. It's so seasonal. Farmers get one opportunity to decide what they want to plant, and it's very difficult to look into the crystal ball with weather conditions and soil conditions and consumer issues on top of that trade policy. So it's a very difficult decision-making process. So yes, in some cases, I think farmers will choose to make different decisions. But the need to diversify to deal with shocks of trade chaos, it's really a long-term process. And yes, we do need to do a better thing, to do things to make us more resilient to handle shocks like this to our system. But right now, we're not there. And it's very difficult to rebound by good decision making with the current situation. So things we need to work on for sure, but right now it's very difficult to adjust when the long-term relationships can be undone very, very quickly.
I have one other follow-up question, and maybe you can provide a succinct answer on this, then we'll go to Sue-Ann. I know, so I grew up in a farming community, and I know for many farmers, the way that you harvest particular crops is different for other types of crops. So and you often have bought equipment that's designed specifically to harvest, the
Right.
crop that you're planning on harvesting. So how difficult is it for farmers to make a different decision about planting? I would assume like you've got sunk costs on equipment that you already own, though you likely, if you have access to capital, you could probably rent equipment to harvest a different type of crop. But I imagine it's quite even forward thinking. If you have limited access to capital, it's going to be difficult for you to be responsive to some of these developments.
Yeah, you're right, Cree. It's a very capital intensive operation for commodity agriculture, and there's just not much flexibility in place. And some of the flexibility goes along. There are inherent costs with shifting, and that takes time. It takes a large investment, and it's a difficult proposition.
Yeah, thank you. Right, Sue-Ann, I know you mentioned a little bit the Supreme Court deliberations in your last answer, but just wanted to give you a chance to expound a little bit on your answer.
Yeah,
So
just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
So
go ahead. I think for us, I mean, even though we're an American-made brand, we don't operate in a silo. We have partners that import, that export, and so I think if the tariffs stay and doesn't get overturned, I think it's just sort of being reactive, being a little bit on the defensive, putting out fires on the weekly, getting calls from partners that this material is not coming in, this material is more expensive. Either way, we'll diversify supply chain. But I think, going, and I'm sure both Aaron and Jenna would appreciate this. I think just being able to go back to business as usual and just to be able to focus on our business and have sustain year over year revenue, that almost seems like a luxury. And I know I have it of the three of us, almost the easiest. But I think, just be able to go back to like focusing on growth or hiring folks or just making long-term decisions with confidence. Because right now we can't really make any long-term decisions because we don't know if certain partners will be in business this time next year, where our raw goods are going to be coming from. Before we used to just purchase materials and turn around products every 6 to 8 weeks. Now we're buying 6 months to a year out in advance because we don't know what this time next year is going to look like. And I don't want to be scrambling for inputs for holiday next year. We have no idea what's going to happen.
yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I have one other question that I wanted to ask to kind of wrap up our discussion. So I wanted to ask if you could advise the United States. So regardless of how the Supreme Court decision comes out, if you could advise the Trump administration, or let's say that the Supreme Court rules against the IEEPA tariffs and moves the ball more into the court of the U.S. Congress. So if you could advise decision makers on U.S. trade policy on next steps to take, what would you ask them to do? And how would this affect your business, your customers, and your employees in the U.S. market, both in the short term and in the long term? And we'll go.
Yeah,
we'll go in
that's a
any
great
order.
question. That's a great question, Cree. it we really do need Congress to reassert its role in this process, regardless of how the Supreme Court is going to rule on it. But what we also need to know, for all of our policy leaders to understand, is that trade policies need to impact our farmers on the ground and our farm workers on the ground. You know, we yes, we want to trade. We would much rather, as farmers, trade our products to customers around the world. We want to feed people in our community and around the world. But we also need to do it in a way that brings those benefits of trade all the way back to the farm. We don't want to just trade in order to make the numbers look good for those who kind of control the international trade market. You know, there's only a few big players in that space that we have to sell into. We need to make sure that all those benefits come all the way back to the farm, and that the trade agreements, while also returning all those benefits back to the farm, also allow for farmer ingenuity. And so, yes, it is important to bring some real pragmatism, some common sense to our trade situation. We also need to think about the next trade deals and see how this impacts not just the broader numbers for pluses and minuses on our trade balance, but also, does it bring those benefits all the way back to our fields and pastures?
Just a quick follow-up for you, Aaron. What are some things that you would like to see to ensure that those benefits come all the way back to Iowa farmers, say?
Yeah, so we know that we have real issues with antitrust issues in agriculture and agribusiness, monopolies in agribusiness. Just a few companies control our inputs, and the vast majority of the business of our inputs, and vast majority of the markets we sell into as well. So making sure that a trade deal doesn't encourage more monopolistic behavior and still abides by our antitrust laws, and that our antitrust laws can apply to a trade agreement. So that's one thing we can do to make sure that happens. Also, we know that a lot of farmer innovation takes place, and we're entering a more of a digitized world in agriculture. And we want to make sure that farmers have a lot of control over the data and that digital process, whether it's with the equipment we use, that we can fix our own equipment, or whether it's the data we use to analyze our inputs. All those things, we want to make sure that farmers retain the data that is becoming an increasing part of the agriculture business.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Sue-Ann or Jenna?
Well, I think that, I think I mentioned this when we had our in-person panel as well, but what kind of resonates for me is that during an election cycle or during an election year, we always hear a lot of talk from our political parties about how much they care about small businesses and farmers. And that's a big selling point, right? So, but in the grand scheme of things, with the kind of the application of the tariffs this year, I think we're seeing how, whether in my industry, whether it's made in America or wherever it's made, it's been really difficult for small businesses specifically. The largest businesses can always kind of figure things out, a way around things, or do things differently with a lot more capital and clout. So I think that, I think for us, we're hoping that some of these trade policies and shifts can be more inclusive or more cognizant of how the needs of small businesses, similar to what Aaron's saying with the farmers, and the impact on actual American businesses, tax-paying businesses who employ people here in the USA. I think that there's been a lot of havoc. So we would, ask that there's a consideration for small businesses in America, because we all are working so globally at this point. So I have one more point to make, but I'm forgetting, so I'll come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to you.
I would just add, like clear and consistent and stable trade policy. I mean, in these last however many months this year, 6 to 9 months, it's just been so chaotic, and we just have to be reactive and really extreme for companies like Ace and Jig. And then I think the other piece about bringing manufacturing to the U.S., I've said this a couple of times before, but just incentivizing production in the U.S. It is possible. It's very, very hard. And so I think, in my case, reducing tariffs on essential inputs or raw materials would be for sure a bonus, but I would even just go back to whatever the original tariffs were versus what they are now, because it's just not sustainable, because the margins on raw goods is so tight as it is that it just makes it impossible. But yeah, for us as a small business, I mean, as small business owners, and like, we can pivot very fast, and we're scrappy, but it's just like this added element just makes things really, really difficult to operate our businesses. So I mean, if anything, just like the stability and just consistency and clarity would be very, very helpful.
I remembered, Sivan, you reminded me, which is had to do with the stability and kind of ability to plan a responsible and successful business, just basic business stuff. But one of the things that we've really struggled with too is the application of the trade and tariff policies around things that don't necessarily have to do with manufacturing. So I think that in the case of the India tariffs, there's been a lot of communication around that being a political pressure tactic to do with buying of Russian oil. And so in that case, we're caught in the crosshairs of a duel, between foreign leaders and our leader and our administration. So that's, again, a tough pill to swallow as far as how much that impacts that type of political, maneuvering, really, the impacts it has on business in America.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that concludes my questions. I just wanted to end by thanking each of you for taking the time to come and share your experiences with us. I know that's been a challenging 11 months and that there may be some reprieve in the near term, depending on how the Supreme Court rules on the IEEPA tariffs. But I imagine there's going to continue to be at least some amount of uncertainty going forward. I also wanted to recognize that small businesses and farmers specifically play a huge role in the U.S. economy. So we're grateful for you taking the time to share your stories, so that those that are participating in the webinar today and those that want to come and view this conversation into the future are able to see your stories and learn from your stories and experiences. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right. Thank you all. With that, we'll conclude our webinar. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.